Hey Star Trek fans, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. You are about to hear our live episode of Enterprising Individuals recorded at CONvergence Con this year in the Twin Cities. It is an episode about Star Trek First Contact, and on it I'm joined by a panel of guests to talk about what many people agree is one of the best Star Trek films. We had a really great show, and you are about to hear it. I want to make a note before you hear it, though, that the audio quality is not exactly the best. It is, of course, a con environment and a live panel, and so I did my best to clean up the audio a little bit, but you might want to turn your volume up just a little. It's not broadcast perfect, but it was a very fun show and very enthusiastic audience, and so I hope that you enjoy our talk about First Contact. If you're not a regular Enterprising Individuals listener, you can find out more about the show by following us on Twitter at EISTPOD, or by going to the Enterprising Individuals website, enterprisingindividuals.com. We're also available in all the usual places, your listening platforms of choice. I'm going to throw it to past me and my panel talking about Star Trek First Contact. Hope you're enjoying your summer. Hope you enjoy the show. And with that, let's get underway. And welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and I didn't go to Zephyr Cochrane High. I went to Harcourt Fenton Mud Reform School. I'm joined on this special live episode by a panel of distinguished guests right over here. They'll serve as our crew for this very special mission. First up, she is the host of the Sailor Noob podcast, an exploration for experts and newcomers of the fashion, food, and culture of the classic anime series Sailor Moon. She's also the co-host of the Just Enough Trope podcast, and she's a frequent guest on Enterprising Individuals. It's Mikanhana. Next up, she's a lifelong geek and a longtime CONvergence attendee. She's also a seamstress, a costumer, and a ceramics artist. And she's a contributor to TwinCitiesGeek.com. It's Rachel Traynham. Our next guest, he's a film critic and author who reviews cinema for Film Inquiry and Twin Cities Geek. He's written books about video game films, 90s cinema, and anime, and he provides regular reviews and commentary at his website, movieswithmark.com. It's Mark McPherson. And finally, he's the writer behind the Science Officer series and the Jessica Keller Chronicles, as well as other Alexandria Station Universe tales and many other sci-fi novels and short stories. He's also the editor and publisher of Boundary Shot Quarterly Magazine, a speculative fiction magazine that explores science fiction and sci-fi topics. Say hello to Blaze Ward. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. You've all been granted permission to come aboard. Today we'll be talking about the film Star Trek First Contact. With the success of Star Trek Generations in 1994, Paramount Pictures immediately asked producer Rick Berman to begin working on a new next-generation film. But what would that movie be about? And would audiences be ready to accept a Kirk-free Trek adventure? The original series films had featured the continuing adventures of Kirk and Spock and the characters that audiences have come to associate with Trek on the big screen. The crew of the Enterprise D had had their share of adventures on the small screen. But what kind of threat would be a match not only for Picard's crew, but for the appetite of movie-going audiences? And how would the TNG films continue the legacy of Star Trek in the movies while carving out their own piece of the Alpha Quadrant? To answer these questions, the writers of First Contact chose perennial TNG nemesis, the Borg, as the film's bad guys, giving them new depth and new dimensions. They also chose to literally reach back into the franchise's history, sending Picard and crew on a time travel journey that would see them meet the flawed but noble architect of Earth's renewal, Zephyr Cochrane. So you have the promise of hope for humanity, an enduring villain, time travel, and what the hell, a little Moby Dick thrown in for good measure. That sounds like a Star Trek to me. The production of the film faced a crunch time schedule, competition from other blockbusters, and a first-time feature director at the helm. The First Contact's critical and financial success proved that the Next Generation had legs as a movie franchise, and that Picard and his crew were ready to take on the duties of the Next Generation of Star Trek cinema. We'll talk about that a little later in the show. Usually at this point in an episode, I ask my guests about their backstory, how they first became Trek fans, but today I'm more interested in your history with this film, Star Trek First Contact. Do you remember the first time that you saw First Contact and your initial reaction to it? And let's start with Mika.
I sadly don't remember. I feel like I was an adult when I saw it. I came to Next Generation when I was a kid, but I don't think I saw the movies until I was older. But the Borg are really scary in this movie, and the Borg Queen is excellent. I think they did an amazing job with her design and everything. She's one of my favorite parts of this movie.
It's very wet.
She's very wet. Yes, she's moist.
Yeah.
Some mighty good coolant on that system.
Speaking of movies, there are a lot of properties from the 90s and older cartoons that are getting adaptations now into cinema films. How far away are we, do you think, from a Sailor Moon live-action film?
Wow. I mean, I don't know. I think it would be cool if there was a live-action Sailor Moon film in America. If I had to cast it, I think it would be a little hard because I'm not super familiar with younger actors, and it would have to be younger actors.
Just recreate the cast of Stranger Things.
Right, exactly. But I think if I could pick people from anywhere, I would pick Sigourney Weaver to be Queen Beryl because I think she'd be amazing.
How greasy would she be?
Mid greasy.
Sure.
So she's got that crystal ball, so that might.
Just woke up, sort of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then maybe Alicia Silverstone as Sailor Moon.
Oh, okay. This is a time-traveling Avengers.
It is. It is. And then I think I would steal a little bit from Strange New Worlds for some of the actors too.
Sure.
And I think I would put Jess Bush as Minako.
Oh.
Sailor Venus.
Oh, you gotta do that.
And I think I would also put Uhura as Sailor Mercury.
Okay.
And then I think I would pull from Euphoria for Mars and Maddie, Alexa Demi for Mars. She's very fiery.
Sure.
So
the girls on Euphoria are in their 20s, right? But they can play young.
Yes,
Oh,
that might work.
Forever. Well, I think that's a pretty good cast, so I look forward to seeing that on screen. Once you get the time travel machine going.
Right, exactly.
Rachel, do you remember seeing First Contact for the first time?
I did. It was in what my daughter currently calls the olden days. So ouch.
Low blow.
Yeah. She's almost 11. It counts for her, I guess. But I was in 8th or 9th grade when the movie came out, and I had this wonderful group of similarly aged Trekkies who we were a very happy group of girls who got to go to the mall to see it, and then discover that everybody else wanted to see it, and then go back the following day when we actually could try again to get tickets.
Oh, okay. That's a phenomenon that doesn't really happen anymore.
So I guess the olden days was
Olden
very
days.
apt.
Yeah, exactly. I have a question for you. I hope it's not too personal. Are you a circus mom?
I am a circus mom. Now I'm going to ask, how do you know?
Social media. How did that start? How did your daughter get into that?
A movie, actually.
Really?
I made the mistake or good idea of taking her to see The Greatest Showman when it was in theaters.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And she came out saying, I really want to learn how to do that. And I realized, oh, I know a place.
That's really cool. And so now she doesn't have to run away to the circus, you just drive her there.
Yes, I drive her there a lot. So be careful when you give your kids their wish.
Yeah.
You may find yourself driving to Highland Park almost every day.
Mark, what was your first contact?
Well, I grew up in a household where Star Trek was a household thing. Like, it was always our tradition. Saturday nights you watch Next Generation. Sunday morning you watch the original series. And so like Star Trek and Star Wars was one of those things like my dad would literally he would pull me out of school just so we could see these films.
We're all gonna watch.
So it's yes, there's a new Star Trek film, totally we're gonna go see this. So yeah, I remember seeing Star Trek First Contact that opening weekend and watching it many times since, and I remember thinking, oh, this is also cool, but also it perfectly tapped into what was frightening to me, because the most frightening character to me on The Next Generation was Data. Just because Data was always it would always feel if there was a villain, you could reason with them, you could talk to them somehow, but if Data was programmed a certain way, it felt like there was nothing you could do. And here's these Borg who will literally not talk to you, and they're programmed to just be the worst. And it's oh man, this is frightening, but also kind of relatable how they kind of establish them as they're like bees. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you.
Right.
Except they will.
Except
So
they want to build a hive in your living room. Yeah. Star Trek has grown by leaps and bounds with the return of Star Trek to TV and to streaming TV, and it seems it's getting so big, and they're growing it all over on the TV scape. Meanwhile, at the Cineplex, not a lot's going on, and it seems like Star Trek 4 gets farther and farther away every day. What do you think the holdup is for returning Star Trek to the multiplex, and what's it going to take to get a Star Trek 4?
I think it mostly depends on what the movie-going audience, because I think First Contact is interesting because it set this it's kind of been set in stone for a while, but it created this more peak action content to associate Star Trek with. Because when you compare with the previous film Generations, which is a lot more sentimental, here you have First Contact, which is much more tactile and exciting, and there's action sequences and daring moments and just enough for all the cast to do, that it almost kind of feels like you have to do that kind of action-oriented. At the same time, I feel almost audiences are too used to it now, where it might be great to see kind of a more harder Star Trek to come about. Just because I think it might, just the subversion, I think, might be enough to get people interested in it again.
Yeah. I think that Christopher Nolan has sort of taken over the intellectual blockbuster space.
Mm-hmm.
And of course his movies are very, very expensive, more than a Star Trek film. And there's many periods of stillness and conversations about concepts and ideas. And so I think it proves that the hunger is still there, but for some reason Star Trek has sort of vacated that space, at least for now.
Mm-hmm.
So come on, Thor, reduce your asking price and let's get this thing made. Blaze, do you remember seeing First Contact for the first time?
I do. I'm the old fart here because I was out of grad school and doing adult things, but we took our entire gaming group Saturday night and said, we're not gaming tonight, and instead we took 7 of us to the cinema to see it as a group. But it was a fun extension because I was in college when Next Gen started. Mm-hmm. And so that was a college thing for us rather than growing up as kids thing. I grew up on TOS reruns in the early 70s on a cable channel out of Salina, Kansas.
Okay.
And so I watched it then and picked it up and waited, and the movies were good, the TV show was better. I wasn't really a fan of Generations because that sentimentality that you mentioned is okay, this isn't Star Trek to me. Bring the Borg, let's do some time travel, let's go crazy. That was Star Trek.
Sure.
That brought it back in a way.
Sure. Speaking of sci-fi action, you're a very prolific author. I was trying to come up with a figure for all the novels and short stories and things that you've written. And do you have a figure? Do you know how many?
I started novel number 82 on Monday.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
30 short novellas. The Science Officer's novella series, and that's what makes me my money.
Sure.
But I also write at pulp speed, which is 120,000.
Yeah, explain pulp speed for the uninitiated.
The pulp writers of the 30s were in dozens of magazines, and the guy who invented it, Lester Dent, was writing at my speed, which is 1 million words a year, but he was putting 10 or 12 short stories in magazines every month. Wow. Mystery, fiction, Western, science fiction, all those various things.
And all through the mail, too, right?
Yeah, pulp writers, we started 1 million words a year. I'm usually sustaining 1.4, which is 120,000 words a month, and a novel is about 40,000 words.
Yeah.
So I write a lot.
How have you shaped your process to maintain pulp speed?
I have the best job in the world. I get up in the morning and people pay me to make up bullshit.
Sure. Would that we all could do that, right? Well, thanks everybody for being on the show. At this point in a normal episode, I usually ask my guests why they chose their particular episode, or in this case, film, to talk about. But I think the reasons for wanting to talk about this film are self-evident, because it's a pretty good film. I think we all agree about that. A lot of nodding heads. You know, the reasons are clear. We love the cast. Jonathan Frakes is a good director. It was written by Braga and Moore, two of the guys that were the architects of what made that era of Trek so exciting. And I remember at the time, I'm not quite as old as Blaze, but close. I was in college when it came out, and we weren't really sure. Me and my friends were split on whether Generations was really great or not. And so we wondered like what this was going to be like. You know, they're going to take the Borg and they're going to do something, and there's time travel, and we recognized, of course, the date of First Contact. So we didn't really know if it was going to come off or not. But I think it was anybody's guess whether they would land this Borg picture and it would be good. And I have some stats from Rotten Tomatoes about what critics think about this movie right now. Guess from the panel, where do you think this ranks in the 13 Star Trek films? Number 1, number 13?
Is 1 the best?
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh. It's got to be up there. I would say it's probably, but I know because I'm cheating a little bit because I know that the JJ films are rated really highly. So I'm going to say it's 4. 4th.
4?
Yeah.
That's strong.
Mark?
Mark?
If I remember correctly, the last time I think it was at somewhere in the 90s, so it's got to be high. I imagine probably maybe like 3 or 2, I think.
It's 2.
Is it 2?
Okay,
so-
All right.
okay.
I'm on
It's
that.
92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Star Trek 2009 is the highest at 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. So obviously it is well respected in this day and age. What do you think, panel? Where do you think that it ranks in the Trek canon? Is it your favorite? Is it your number 2? Blaze.
Khan is always going to be my favorite,
Sure.
because that came out when I was, I think, 12, 13. And
That's a
how
good
it
age.
looked.
Yeah.
And I remember Khan from the early stuff, and he was such a powerful villain. This one, when I went back and watched it for this, the Borg sequences stood up really well, but when you got down on the planet, it kind of lagged for me. So that kind of, I don't want to say turned me off, because it was a fun movie, but it was more like an extended episode of the show.
Yeah.
So I would say Khan, and probably it'd be about 3rd or 4th for me.
That's often, it's both a criticism and a compliment when people say about a Star Trek film, well, it feels like a long episode. And a lot of times people level that as like, I wanted something a little more, I wanted something bombastic. But I often find, I like Star Trek episodes, and so this one has maybe a couple extra acts. Sometimes it hits the spot in the same way. What about you, Rachel?
I'm going to say it is definitely my favorite. Part of this is why I like the original series well enough, but it's never going to be my crew. It didn't resonate with me the way that like the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine and now Lower Decks and Discovery just really have resonated with me. And so while I enjoy the original series movies and Wrath of Khan is good, rewatching this, I actually enjoyed looking at it from an adult perspective instead of my like
Less sweet.
yeah, and it's, while some of the stuff that was on the surface was maybe a little awkward, I also really appreciated the performances that were turned in by Alfred Woodard and, thank you.
Farmer Hoggett.
Yeah. So yeah, well, I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed the rebooted Star Trek. This is, it's good. It holds up as
Sweet spot.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, I wasn't, a little baby when it came out, but this is definitely when I was like, oh man, I really like Star Trek. Like, I'm a Star Trek fan. I'm just absorbing it all. Mark, where does this sit for you?
Probably either 2 or 3, because like
Obviously Star Trek 5.
well, well, I mean, like Wrath of Khan is like the easy one to go up there, but I almost like it. I have it like neck and neck with this and Star Trek 4.
Yeah.
Just because I like seeing when the captains are kind of like thrown out of their element and they're basically like lose their cool or don't know how to react. And that's why I found it a lot of fun to see like just Picard just so, just like losing everything with like his trauma and everything, and just delivering these quotable performances that are just like they're over the top, but they fit perfectly for this character.
Yeah.
You broke your little ships.
No!
In the initial draft of the script, they had Riker on the ship and Picard on the planet dealing with the Zephyr Cotton situation. And so it's a good fix suggested by Patrick Stewart, tapping into that idea of no, he has to be there because of the character's history with the Borg and deconstructing like this myth of Picard as the calm, cool, collected captain. So it was a good choice. Rewriting is okay sometimes, only sometimes.
Similarly to Mark, I think it's either 2 or 3, but so Wrath of Khan would be first for me, and then it's kind of neck and neck with Star Trek 6. I really like Undiscovered Country.
Like Cold War metaphors.
Yeah. It's a really good film. And I think it's underappreciated. But I think that the Borg are a really good enemy. And I think it's really interesting, and I love everything that Picard is going through. And I really think that Alfred Woodard, her performance, watching it this time through, just really shined, and she was amazing and was the only one who could get through to Picard, which is actually kind of something. Like everybody else, right? Everybody else was gonna just leave him alone.
Yeah, right.
They're like, okay, there's nothing else we can do. We're just going to go down with the ship.
Captain
and it's
says
like,
we do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So.
But when you see your captain on the holodeck using a Tommy gun on the Borg, you realize you got to step in.
Yes.
In a 90s movie, she would have gotten a tape of that and then showed it at the critical moment, and then that would have broken the, everybody's like, oh no, he's gone too far. The secret taping scene. Well, let's talk about the technical details, and we'll talk about the cast again in a little bit. This movie came out on the 22nd of November in 1996. The screenplay was by Brandon Braga and Ronald D. Moore, and the story was by Braga, Moore, and Rick Berman. It was directed, of course, by Jonathan Frakes, who this is his first feature, but he, of course, had directed a lot of Star Trek episodes at that time. It was produced by Rick Berman. The star date for the film is 50893.5, and of course, it also takes place on April 4th and April 5th of the year 2063. It had a budget of $45 million, and it doubled that at the American box office, making $90 million. It made $146 million internationally. So at $146 million, where do you think it fits in the 13 Star Trek films as far as earning? And you can all say, I don't know.
Third?
Third?
I mean,
I don't know.
You kind of got to take into like do you mean like how much of a profit it made off of the budget?
Well, just total box office.
Or just total box office?
Yeah.
Oh, well then, I don't know, I'd probably say maybe like 6, I think. I'm just because I'm thinking of like the newer Star Treks tend to like make a little bit more money.
Yeah.
Are we adjusting for inflation?
Ooh,
Not
good question.
What is that in 1996 dollars?
Yeah.
Probably a lot more.
I would guess probably 5th. Yeah.
It is exactly that.
No?
Oh.
So you get the prize. And as far as the other Star Trek films go, 1, 2, and 3 is 1, 2, and 3 of the Kelvin reboot. So Star Trek Beyond, or Into Darkness and Beyond. So the power of good marketing, I think.
Yeah.
But still, very high earner and very impressive for $1996. Here's some facts about the film from our memory banks. This is the first Star Trek film since the motion picture to not reuse footage from previous films. TOS movie has You've seen that bird of prey blow up like 10 times now. They often do that as a cost-saving measure, but all the footage was new in this film. It's the only Star Trek film to not feature scenes on a planet other than Earth. And I know it's the first, but I believe it might be the only Star Trek film that does not feature a scene in a transporter room. And I think that owes to the very tight pacing of the film. You know, we immediately smash in. We've got a problem, the Borg are here, we're going back in time, computer give us clothes. No time to explain that there's a little room that they go to and then beam down. You don't need it, you get it. This is also the first time that the phrase Star Trek was ever uttered in the Star Trek franchise. And James Cromwell makes that amazing joke about them on a Star Trek.
Truly, this was a Star Trek First Contact. Great line.
Hugh does say in the finale to TNG, though, that he's going to put an end to their trek through the stars. So something a little similar there. It was nominated for Best Makeup at the Academy Awards and Best Dramatic Presentation for the Hugo Awards, but no Star Trek films ever won an Oscar. Sci-fi films tend to get shut out of the Oscars. What do you think it would take to get a Trek film to win an Oscar? It would have to exist, first of all, we know that. Scorsese. It's like ships pulling up to Eric Clapton songs.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be in Starfleet. But there you go.
It just reminds me how much of a tragedy is that there wasn't any award or nomination for the score for this, because listening through it again, I'm just like, this is so beautiful. I forgot how good it deserved better. If that score didn't get a nomination, I don't know what it would take aside from like gold press platinum being mailed to people.
Right.
It works anyway.
If we were making one today, it would do better because there's been more science fiction and it's taken more seriously that it can get Oscars and get awards. The technicals, at least. I don't know about the acting.
Yeah, technicals. Sure, technicals for sure. Coran won Best Director for Gravity, but I think that's like the only major award a sci-fi film's ever really had. So.
Does Lord of the Rings not count because that's fantasy?
Oh well, that's a genre pick. You know.
It's fantasy, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
And the orcs have laser guns. In this movie, we are introduced to a new Enterprise. Of course, this is the first view that we get of the Enterprise E after the destruction of the D in the last film. What do you think about the design of the Enterprise E? Which, by the way, we don't get to spend a lot of time with. 3 films, and that's it. Impressions on the Enterprise E?
It's slicker. I like the sleeker design. Like it always felt like the Enterprise D from like Generations. You always had to be careful with it, which they had to like detach the whole saucer column. and here it felt like, you know, like maybe it's just like, I don't know, it feels like they just like squished it in a little bit so like it would look more sleeker and dynamic. Yeah. Where I don't know, I think at least for this film it works just because like you have that opening sequence of them fighting the Borg. And when you see like this longer, sleeker design, you could imagine this ship going into combat and just like, okay, like I can understand why they would have this ship. I know they don't want it there, but they could bring it there.
Right. It's similar to the way they redesigned the original Enterprise for the reboot films. You know, it's got a more slicker, kind of sexier kind of feel to it.
Just make it thinner.
Yeah, and there's like a canon reason about how, it is, you know, designed to fight Borg and to fight threats, not just be the big cruise ship going through the galaxy and Ubering people around from planet to planet. I love it. I think it's very beautiful. I wish that we got to see more of it. And the saucer only slightly looks like a toilet seat. You know? Not the seat itself, but the cover that comes down.
And the thing that jumped out at me was the interiors. The original series, everything was bright and white. And as the movies and series have proceeded, the interiors get darker and the walls get black and everything is now light and shadow and all that. And it struck me, we got on the bridge and the bridge was so much darker than either the D or the originals.
Because everyone had eye strain from the bright lights, so they needed to adjust. I like that it took the neck away a little bit, which I understand why you would need that, so because the saucer separated off. And because you're in space, you don't necessarily need to worry about drag or whatnot, but it just seemed like such a weak point in the ship where you just need to focus your fire here and then you separate and...
Kill the neck and the head. Yeah, it goes from having that graceful neck to, like you said, almost no neck, like going from a ballet dancer to like a wrestler or something. Or squat and kind of ready for action. John Eaves, the illustrator that designed the ship, got all the way through the process, was ready to go, had the design signed off, and sent it to the people, and they sent it back and they said, looks like a chicken. Because initially, he had, it was the same basic body, but the nacelles, instead of kind of going straight out, went forward. And they were also designed to go up and down like Voyager's nacelles did. And they said, it looks like a chicken in a pan. He's like, oh. Hold on, that's what erasers are for. And so they gave it the more sort of classic look like that. Let's talk about the cast of the film and the guest stars in this film. Something that I think we can all agree on is that when Star Trek films look for guest stars, they don't hold back. They go out and they get great actors with gravitas, your David Warners, your F. Murray Abrahams, Christopher Plummer, Oscar winners, Benedict Cumberbatch, British guys. But they tried something a little different for this, and one of the differences is James Cromwell, who of course was an American actor, but and also a guy who had a fairly successful career. He was on Barney Miller a couple times, but was not somebody who was like your David Warner, your F. Murray Abraham. He had come off of Babe at this point, so he was kind of hot. Well, no, I mean, Babe was a smash.
Yeah.
That will do, Pig.
Yeah, would do fine. And of course went on to films like LA Confidential and more roles in Star Trek. But he's somebody who was on Star Trek before. He was on TNG a couple times. He was on DS9 once. And I love the fact that Paramount has actors that they like, and they just bring them back. So we like this person. We like working with them. Put some chewing gum on his face. People won't recognize him. He's another alien. It's fine. But they said, like, no, this is the guy that we want to be, the father of all of Star Trek, to be the father of the Federation. I think that that's really great.
Well, and I think that Zefram Cochrane, we've heard about him before this film came out, but I think, your idea about him was very different from the actual guy.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really neat. And I liked that they made him a real person and they made him flawed. And it was kind of, they say never meet your heroes, but they were so excited to meet him, the crew of the Enterprise, and he was running away because it was too much pressure.
I don't want to be a statue.
Well, that's well, that's always a very sobering moment. The thing is, people say never meet your heroes, because then you see that they're not these towering achievements of inspiration. But it's actually really good to meet your heroes, because then you can see that they're flawed, and to know that Zefram Cochrane, this guy who brought about the new age of Star Trek, was just this terrified drunk who wanted to take trains the whole time is a little bit, and that's one of the things you can kind of see in the crew, because even they're excited to meet him, but they're also kind of oh, okay, he's a little bit terrified, but hey, if I were in his shoes, yeah, I guess I'd be terrified. So they're just kind of yeah, we'll kind of ease you into it, we'll help you out, maybe this will affect the timeline, but whatever, they did that in 4, we'll do it.
Right, yeah. There's a theme in the film of sort of taking people down a peg or having more perspective. Lily provides perspective to Picard, the future man, and also our characters realize that this guy is maybe not this hero that we thought. And I have a theory, and I don't know if they intended this at all, but maybe Zefram Cochrane is Gene Roddenberry in a way. Gene Roddenberry, we have this idea of him, he kicked off this great new era in sci-fi, and we have these amazing concepts and ideas about him, but in reality, he was a TV writer. He wanted to get rich. He had a nice idea. It didn't start as a super pure thing. And also, he didn't do it alone. He had a crew, he had writers, he had people of color and women, and over time, as a person, he improved as a person, and he became an advocate for the world that he helped create, and the idea of Star Trek that we have now. So I don't know, someday I gotta get somebody to confess that that's what they meant.
He had faith of the heart.
He had faith of the heart.
I'm sorry.
You're fine. Let's talk about Alfred Woodard. She probably is the most decorated actress that was added to this film. She's both Oscar and Emmy nominated, and she's been appearing in films steadily since the 90s. She was in 5 films just in 1996 when this came out.
Holy cow.
So, yeah, she's working hard. And ultimately in her career, she's had 18 Emmy nominations, and she's won 4 times. So we've talked about Lily before. I love this character, and I read a couple reviews at the time. People were like, I wish they could bring this character back. I feel like she's probably not going to be in the future films. If they could find a way to have Lily hang around, that might have been a good, interesting idea.
I think it might have been an interesting idea too. I do think that I was grateful that we did get the moment in the film for her and Picard to say goodbye to each other, because like initially it doesn't seem like we're going to get that moment, because she kind of says goodbye to him before he's going to go save Data, but she doesn't know if she's going to see him again. And so we get the real goodbye on the planet. And I was really thankful that we got that moment. But I was really sad to see her go. I mean, I think she could have, I don't know, I think she would have been great in Starfleet. If they would have allowed her to make that jump. Like they did in, like they kind of did in 4. Yeah.
The problem is as much as I would, unless they could figure out a way to just make it happen, or to have made it happen for the future films, is that her coming back with them wouldn't have served this particular film well.
Yeah.
Like, she needed to be there to...
She's inspired by Star Trek.
Yeah.
Well, she's
to create a new world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like she's an audience surrogate, because like the thing is, like, what I liked about her is that she asks like the questions like you always kind of want to ask in Star Trek, like, do you guys get paid? Which is always an interesting question, because they kind of like economics within Star Trek have always been kind of a little bit wishy-washy, and Picard's kind of like, well, we don't really get paid, we kind of have a credit system, just which I think is great for like a little crash course to make the movie more relatable for people just coming into Star Trek for the first time.
We kind of mentioned this before, but you were saying that she was the surrogate in the film for the audience, but she's also, just because she doesn't know what a cyborg is, or she doesn't know how all the things that Picard has achieved, his rank, she's not really seduced by any of that, any of his rank or gravitas, and she's somebody who could say, hey, you're screwing up here, like you're going too far. Everybody's too scared to tell you this, but I've seen cruelty before, I've seen men do horrible things, and like you're on the borderline of that. And having a character like that can reach through and contact, because when Picard does something, it's okay. And I think the movie plays with this a lot, like he's telling people, just shoot your friends, we can't help them. He Tommy guns a guy in a holodeck. And as the film goes on, you're starting to think like, is Picard in the wrong here? Is he losing it? And I almost think that it's a mistake. I mean, obviously nothing that Patrick Stewart does can be wrong. But I almost think that another movie would have played it a little rougher, would have hit it a little harder. Like we would have seen him yell at somebody more, or say something or do something so we know that he's like kind of, turning to the dark side. But because he's Picard, like I'm still almost like, oh no, he's going to fix the phaser. They're going to get right back out there and save everything, because we've seen it happen a million times. And I love that character coming in and saying, you got to stop. This is crazy. And the way that she does it is by reaching out to him through art and literature, which is, of course, is Picard's thing. So he yells at her about comparing him to Captain Ahab. How dare you? But then he thinks about it, and he's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. You got it right. And the perfect button on the scene is her saying, yeah, I didn't read the book. I never read that book. I saw the movie, Gregory Peck, great, but I'm not ready for this program. Do you think that this, let's talk about some of the themes more. This premise, like, is this like the best premise ever for a Trek film? Or were we going to have to eventually, show this event, this moment? Because they never really did have to show this, but they decided, let's take it back to the beginning, to this first contact.
I think it's really great if you're going to do time travel and go to a pivotal moment. I think it's an incredibly pivotal moment in Star Trek, and the Borg know that, and they're smart. And
Yeah, they didn't go after the whales.
no, they didn't go after the whales. They're like, this point in time, yeah, it's not, I guess it's not a fixed point, but we're not talking about Doctor Who. But this point in time, this is when they first made contact with the Vulcans, and and then it was just they were in space.
Yeah.
So if we can prevent that and go back in time and basically make that void of ever happening, then we'll just take over Earth.
And as the Borg, they're very efficient because they've got a twofold plan, which is destroy that point in time.
Right.
But also just take over Earth anyway, while we're there.
Might as well.
So in the future, everybody's just a Borg anyway.
Yeah.
They say in the movie that the population of Borgified Earth is 9 billion. And the Borg, if they're nothing else, are efficient. So it's like 9 billion, the perfect amount of people to be on Earth. Anywhere beyond that, we're
Probably.
taxing the environment too much? I don't know. We're getting close.
They
for our current world.
probably figured out like the maximum amount to be,
I just want to see a
plug
Borg guy
in
with a
as a
calculator.
Borg.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. How about the Borg Queen? She's a new addition to the franchise, of course, to this movie. What do you think about the concept of the Borg Queen as an addition to the Borg, an addendum?
I loved her because there's one part where she's arguing with Picard, and you realize that she might be the last of the original species that becomes the Borg. And we've seen these things, and we've done all these things to the rest of you. And that jumped out at me with, who were they before they became the Borg? Where did they come from? And I don't know that that's ever been really deeply explored. I'm not fully up to date on the new shows.
For the planet Moistius 2. It also kind of, I don't think anybody was ever arguing that the Borg had the right, way to do things on the show, but it kind of, do you think it undercuts their philosophy of collectivism to have the one who's the most equal above all? Is that a commentary on their society?
I feel like it might be like a commentary on their society, but I think it's also a way of drawing people into it, because it almost feels like if the Borg just need to a regular organic being that they want to bring in, they'll just touch them, just throw their tech all over them. But where if you wanted to convince someone like Data to be in there, I found it really interesting how the Borg Queen just basically uses the appealing to him on a different level of the pleasure and sexual
the
allure.
The flesh, literally, yeah.
Yeah, just saying hey, we got some cool stuff in the Borg.
All kinds of stuff.
It's look, I know all these other foot soldiers don't do anything for you, but I'm sweaty.
She's not going around and blowing on the arm hairs of all the Borg. He's special.
Yeah.
I love that they give him the flesh. He's obviously tempted, literally by this. Mm-hmm. And then but he's still Data, and he tries to break out.
Yeah.
The first thing they do is attack the flesh. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, don't hurt my flesh.
Right.
And then we don't see him until Picard sees him later. So it sets up that you don't really think that Data's going to turn on Picard. But it does give you that plausibility at the end where he's like, no, I have half a face now. I like this. I'm going to stay with the Borg. Although Data is becoming more human because he has a sense of drama, because he lets it go. Wait, why does he go to the... He shoots torpedoes and everything. Just say, no, and then smash the thing.
Actually,
set up this whole cinematic...
I kind of like that aspect because it plays up with Generations, with how he couldn't really handle the emotion chip.
Okay.
And then in the very beginning of First Contact, they show him directly learning how to channel that emotion chip.
Yeah.
So I found it really interesting that when he's actually approached, when the Borg literally asked dude, when's the last time you've been laid? Just oh well, you see, I have all these circuits, and I almost kind of found it interesting how he was trying to manage okay, maybe if I play dumb, maybe I kind of like this, but I might want to regulate it for later if I want to do some cool.
Run subroutine one-liner. Resistance is futile.
Yep.
If he has an emotion chip now, then he probably is actually learning to appreciate
he's
the impulse.
That was so cool. Did you see what I did?
When he was being enticed, he was thinking that's I'm going to keep that in my pocket for later.
I'll be eating out in the store forever, yeah. Well, I mentioned before that the critical response to First Contact was very positive, but I've noticed that when critics talk about a Star Trek movie, they tend to say the same sort of things. It's hard to tell necessarily what movie they're talking about. So I thought that we could play a little game with the audience where they try to guess whether a given review is for Star Trek First Contact or from Star Trek Beyond, the last released Star Trek film. It's a game called First Contact or Last Contact. And we'll need some volunteers from the audience to play. If you guess right, you get a prize. If you guess wrong, you get a smaller prize. Everybody gets prizes. So do you have any volunteers? And I've got my panel here. They are actually going to be going through and reading the reviews. Mark, can I borrow your microphone?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, here, this.
Okay, so first right here. What's your name?
Lily.
And who wants to, Nika, did you go first? Give us the review.
Oh, okay, sure. All right, so here is the review. The movie bounces along, hurtling its heroes over colliding wreckage and into currents of artificial gravity, pausing just long enough for a punchline or a knowing exchange of looks.
Wow. First Contact or Star Trek Beyond?
Tricky. The quips amongst artificial gravity makes me want to say Beyond.
What's the answer?
Beyond.
Wow! I've got some board games over here.
Oh, dang! Wow. Man, you went all out.
Would you like a Sonic Monopoly, Star Wars Monopoly Solo Edition, or Risk, Rick and Morty? Star Wars? All right. Star Wars Solo Monopoly, there you go. Who wants to make a guess? Traynham in the back here. They're like, Donahue, remember him?
Yes, I do.
Revealing the ages here.
Mark, go ahead and read your review. Oh, sorry, what was your name?
Kirsten, and I have to say I do vividly remember seeing this in the theaters with my dad. With part of that dream sequence, I vividly remember we both jumped in our chair when a Borg started popping out of his face.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mark, read your review.
All right. This is why we go to Star Trek. For a tomorrow of promise and possibility and stories that lift us from the muck of what we are to submit of what we might learn to be.
All that muck. Is that Star Trek First Contact or Star Trek Beyond?
I'm going to say First Contact.
You are right. Yeah.
Would you like a Morty, a Risk, or would you like the Sonic Monopoly game?
You know, I think I'm going to have to go Sonic Monopoly.
Okay.
Nostalgia of watching
Gotta get it fast.
Sonic.
Go with the 90s.
Another volunteer. Way over in the corner over there.
Let's work this out.
Run, Donahue, run.
Donahue's not running anywhere. Jennifer, and let's get a review from Rachel.
A smashingly exciting sci-fi adventure that ranks among the very best in the long-running Paramount franchise.
Very fast and long running. What do you think? Is it Star Trek First Contact or Star Trek Beyond?
I want to say First Contact.
You are right.
Nice. This is a very lucky crowd.
Yeah.
I have a Risk game. I also have some other Star Trek stuff. I've got a Borg and a Lando Funko Pop. Borg? Sure. Enjoy your Borg. We've got more reviews, right? Somebody else. Not volunteer? Brown shirt? I'll be right over. It will take me a long time. Hi, what's your name?
Ian.
Ian, let's get a review from Blaze.
This is something that has been missing from Star Trek for a while. An arresting picture of a shiny, hopeful future worth dreaming of.
Shiny and hopeful and dreaming. What do you think?
That sounds like it wasn't written in the 90s, because the 90s were happy and the time of Star Trek Beyond was not as much, so I'm going to go Beyond.
You are correct.
Wow. Our crowd.
The cynicism angle, I like it. Speaking of being cynical, you want this Rick and Morty Risk? All right. couple more. Another volunteer? Way in the back. Have you guys come up next time. Hi, what's your name?
Skylar.
Skylar, let's get a review from Mika on the end there.
All right. The movie never delivers on its considerable promise because it's always in such a hurry to get to the next action scene.
Interesting. Kind of negative review? What do you think,
I'm gonna say First Contact.
It's actually beyond.
Oh. Both action-ish movies?
Yes.
Beyond's the one where the Enterprise explodes, right?
Yes.
I'm going to rush to get to that. Well, here's a consolation prize. This is a bag, one of our merchandise items. It's a Janeway tote bag.
Oh. Wow.
Well-behaved women seldom make admiral.
Nice.
How about one more before we wrap up? Yeah, right here. What's your name?
My name is Barbara.
Barbara, let's get a review from Mark.
All right.
Barbara, be a good one.
Okay.
No ends.
It displays a zippy new energy and a sleek, confident style, fully independent of its predecessors.
God, First Contact.
She got it, man. This is right.
We've got two very good prizes, so.
And,
Do you want a Lando Calrissian Funko Pop?
No.
we got other
Well,
prizes.
in that case,
You gotta do that.
what about another one of our merch items? This is another tote bag. It is
Is it a Janeway?
it's a Galaron. Somebody else will take it if you don't want it.
No, that's
It says, it is a good day to I. All right. Somebody else talk.
Too bad this movie doesn't have the transporter room after all.
Yes.
Yeah.
No transporter room. Let's get into our wrap up here. And the wrap up involves questions and comments from the audience. So if you've got something to say about Star Trek First Contact, you've been hearing us talk about it, now's the time to share. Oh, should I have that mic again?
It's okay.
Okay. Just yell it out. Yes.
You already sort of mentioned it, the whole idea of having a queen.
Yeah.
For me, it was a very hard break from the previous setup of the Borg.
Yeah.
So it kind of threw me for that movie.
And ultimately negative, do you think? They make the point that, well, bees have queens, insects have queens sometimes.
Yes, but they're not really bees, are they?
No.
No.
They're
The most
bees with-
terrifying bees ever.
They're bees with pizza cutter hands. Yeah. Yeah.
So actually building on that, one of the interpretations that I've always liked of the Queen is that instead of being the commander of the Borg, she is a tool that the Borgs have adapted and used to deal with people who have emotions or people who are unpredictable. That they use temptation, to use allure, to use emotional drives to manipulate and catch them. And as soon as they are done with them, they dispose of the Queen.
It's sort of like the theory behind why they kidnapped Jean-Luc in the first place, right? To make him locutus, to make him the locutor with this stubborn race, the humans. So that's an interesting idea.
I found it kind of interesting too, like how, the more that they focused on the Borg and Next Generation, they had Borg that kind of had individuality, and kind of just shoved it into the Borg and to see what happens. And I almost kind of think it's interesting, where it's almost like, okay, the Borg did take in individuality, but if they recognized it, I think they almost recognized, who should be in power then with that type of individuality?
So you're saying the Borg being could almost be like an evolution of the way that they adapt to new challenges, they're adapting to individuality by having a mouthpiece.
Yeah, pretty much.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah, please.
Okay, was it valid, so was the identity of the Borg Queen validated by the ending of Star Trek Picard?
Oh, with spoilers for
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
With doing the Yeah, I don't. That's one of those things that they kind of dropped on us, and I think we'll have to, look to future uses of the characters to see what the effects are. But it is definitely an interesting idea, having and we don't really know, like, there's clearly multiple women who are the Borg queen, but having her sort of agree to this deal, we'll have to see if that's where they take that and if that's really how they want to continue to improve themselves. But I'm looking forward to what they come up with. In the front?
I like the idea that the Borg Queen is an infestation of the Borg, and that the Borg were originally the Borg we saw, but somehow the Queen came in and started to slowly corrupt the Borg into something else, because...
An infection of the hive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an infection of the hive.
So sick queen? That's interesting, like that they were maybe more of a, collectivist, self-sustaining thing, but then became more invasive. That's an interesting idea. Drawn from biology. Any other questions or comments on the end?
In Star Trek II, which is built on an original series episode,
Yeah.
we get the same actor returning to play Khan.
Yeah,
In this case, we get a different Zefram Cochrane.
right.
Could the panelists talk about the metamorphosis Cochrane versus the one in the film?
I always wondered if the guy in the toss really was, or it was an impersonation, because you find him centuries after he's supposed to be dead on a rock in the middle of nowhere, claiming to be. But it was Adventure of the Week that dropped it and never mentioned it again. So I like that they brought him back and made him 1.5 feet taller.
People shrink in old age.
James Conner was 6'10".
It's, he's
Very tall.
Probably a little less now, but yeah, he's very, very tall. I saw him on a panel at Mission Chicago, and he talked about working on First Contact, and he told a story about the scene where he's drunk in the bar, and he's trying to get Dana to talk to and make out with him. And he said that he's a professional actor, he's acted drunk before, but maybe he'll take a little shot just to get in the feel for it. And then his call was delayed for a couple hours, and he kept sort of like, not really adrenaline. So by the time they got to the set at night to do that scene, he's like, okay, let's do this. It's hard to reconcile the two characters, isn't it? But I mean, if you were going to, sort of headcanon it, I don't know. I could see, we see Cochrane again in the premiere of Enterprise, obviously, later after the events of First Contact. I could see him kind of getting old and kind of fed up and just grabbing a shuttle and just heading off in a certain direction. People in Star Trek seem to kind of ice flow themselves sometimes. Scotty apparently just got in a shuttle and just went off somewhere. And so maybe he did that and then ran into this companion creature. And so we're seeing maybe an idealized version of him. Maybe he didn't want to be that tall, and so the companion has renewed him and made him shorter. But I always like it when they reach into the histories of past like they have with First Contact. Anybody else? A couple more questions. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, First Contact is usually considered to be the best of the next-gen movies. Do you agree with that? And if so, why do you think it is?
Good question. To the panel.
Yes, because I think it is also kind of a horror movie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is, I don't think the future movies really figured out what it was that made this one work. It's like a Star Trek episode, but it's also a horror movie.
It's similar to Alien in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I also felt there was enough for all of the crew to do in that situation, as opposed to like everyone just like doing what they normally do with their duties on the Enterprise. Like now they're faced with a situation where they got to be on an Earth that's different from the one they know, and like an Enterprise that's different from the one they know. So it felt like there was enough for everyone to do in this movie than the other Next Generation movies.
The engineer's usually the character that just says, we don't have the power to do that, we're coming apart. But I like that Geordi is very critical to the mission here. Like he's doing all this work and he's getting the pipes and fixing the ship that he can fix because he has the blueprints of the ship in the ship's computer. Well, I think we're just about going to wrap up here. A couple minutes left, but at the end of every enterprising individual show, we have a segment called My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why? And starting with Blaze, I'd like to know who your favorite captain is and why.
Wow. I grew up on Kirk, but Bill Shatner turned out to be an asshole.
Yeah, what happened? Canadians are supposed to be nice.
And so I'd have to probably give Picard the slight edge on that one.
Okay. Nice guy. Rachel?
It is a constant internal turmoil between Picard and Sisko because I like them both for such different reasons. But I guess Picard is the only one who actually stayed a captain after the end of his series, really. So I guess I would have to go for Picard, just mainly for the inspirational bits.
Mark, you've given me yours before, but remind me what it is.
I mean, I like Picard for like his development of like slowly liking, like changing from this guy who didn't really like kids to like saying like, maybe kids are okay. Maybe kind of grow into that dad aspect. But I kind of like the new Christopher Pike just because he has nice hair. I wish there was a bigger reason for it, but I mean, he's nice. I like that he cooks for the crew and everything.
So to the opposite of Picard.
I know it's superficial, but
Picard can't compete with that.
I mean, he cooks for his crew. What other captain does that as
What about you?
I think I have to go with Picard. He was my first captain, and
First contact.
yeah, you never forget your first. I like all of them for different reasons, but I just come back to Picard. He is the home base,
Yeah. Well, you're on the right panel then. Well, thanks to the panel for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe today. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at @EISTPOD on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find each of you online? Mika?
Yeah, you can find me at Mikanhana on Twitter and justenoughdroke.com, and search for Sailor Noob wherever you can find podcasts.
I'm on Twitter at madness_Mark. I also run a website called movieswithmark.com where I review stuff. And I also have a YouTube channel, just Movies with Mark, where I review even more stuff.
You can find me on Twitter at @sship_suburbia, where I occasionally talk about things and mainly show pictures of pottery. Also Starship Suburbia on Facebook. And then, even though I haven't been great at it late, you can find my writing on Twin Cities Geek.
You can find me at blazeward.com and find my books everywhere. Check them out in the library, too.
Well, let's have a round of applause for our panel. Thanks to them for talking with us. This episode will be available at twitch.tv/EISTPOD for the next week, and on our show feed, of course, at enterprisingindividuals.com in perpetuity. You can follow us on Twitter at EISTPOD. Thanks again to my guests for joining me, and thanks to the audience here and the audience at home. Hope to see you again next year. We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed. BackTrekking is back for an all-new season. Hi, I'm Caliban.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
And we'd like to introduce you to BackTrekking, the podcast that explores the real-world inspirations behind your favorite episodes of Star Trek.
From historical events to classical literature to blockbuster films, we go where no pod has gone before to seek out the origins of classic Trek tales.
Did you know, Gooey, that the TNG episode Too Short a Season was an allegory for the Iran-Contra affair?
Yeah, only sweatier. Did you know that the Enterprise episode Regeneration was an homage to the John Carpenter film The Thing?
Archer and T'Pol freezing to death over a bottle of whiskey would have been a controversial ending.
As a dog lover, Archer would not like The Thing, I'm guessing.
Oh my god, movie night is canceled. Join us every other Thursday for a journey back to the beginnings of the Trek universe.
BackTrekking is available wherever you get your podcasts.
No, Porthos!